Dustin, how did you kind of get here, and what led you to chiropractic?
So absolutely. So kind of grew up an athlete and just really a hyperactive kid, which kind of led me to athleticism, from running to school in elementary school to cross country and all sorts of sports throughout high school. And then playing collegiately, soccer and running track and cross country. Once I was done with that portion of my career, I transitioned into the military where I served 9 years in the Marine Corps. And after sustaining some injuries, but still, being an athlete, I had that urge to still want to keep moving. Chiropractic found me, and it was in my young 30s that I first got my adjustment. And not knowing that it was going to lead me down the life of becoming a chiropractor, once I got out into the civilian side, the chiropractor asked me that famous question, have you ever considered being a chiropractor? Because I've always been a person of selfish service. So when they asked me that question after moving from California to Georgia and finding out that one of the best chiropractic colleges is right here in Georgia, I had to apply. And it had been 15 years since I had done my undergrad. So it's kind of a big move for me, but I'm glad that I did. And, here I am. And now I'm a huge endurance runner. I travel, I run anywhere from, a mile up to, 150 miles at a time. So chiropractic keeps me straight, pun intended.
That's that's impressive. What was the longest run that you've done?
150 miles.
That was 150. Okay. Yeah. And was that in Kentucky, or was that Pennsylvania? Was that somewhere?
That was in Virginia.
Okay, Virginia. And that wasn't too long ago, right?
No. Almost less than a year ago.
Okay. Yeah, that's impressive. What's going on, guys? It's Dr. Brandon here. That's Dr. Dustin. We're with Align Life of Sugar Hill, and we're coming to you today to talk about being a lifelong athlete, how chiropractic care can keep you in the game. So first off, before we even start, I just kind of want to go through who we are, how we got here, and then kind of our athletic journey. So Dr. Dustin, if you'd like to tell them kind of what led you to chiropractic to begin with.
Absolutely. So, I always started out as kind of a hyperactive kid. My mom would open up the door and I would just run. That kind of led me to, channeling that through multiple sports, throughout high school. And then because of that dedication, determination, I went on to play collegiately, soccer, and ran track and cross country. From there, I wanted to continue to be a person of selfish servitude. So I went on to serve 9 years in the Marine Corps, where in that sense, I became, an athlete in its own right. Carrying hundreds of pounds of weight, through all sorts of terrain. With that, when I transitioned out, I got more into endurance sports. And I was only able to do that because of, getting adjusted while I was in the service for the first time. And then when I got out, that chiropractor that I was seeing, through community care asked me that famous question, have you ever considered becoming a chiropractor? Because of how much it affected me, and benefited me. I want to be able to give that back to people as well.
Right.
So I applied for the world famous Life University. And then here I am today, helping athletes just like myself, no matter the age or gender.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think one thing that you said is you were in the military and you're a Marine, and that's an athletic capability in its own right, or you're an athlete in your own right at that regard. And that's some of the stuff that we're going to talk about here in a little bit. But like really everybody's an athlete. And I had a chiropractor tell me, I was interviewing him in school. It was for one of the assignments that I had to do. And he talked about that too. He's like, listen, everybody, because he worked with a lot of athletes, and he said, everybody's an athlete, no matter if you're working at a grocery store or you're an accountant. Like, are you moving, or do you know how to move properly? And you know how you keep yourself in the game, right? In your game, whatever that is. And he's like, you have to start thinking about life like that. And I think that's where maybe sometimes we go wrong, but it's well said, So just quickly about me, I'm originally from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I thought I would be becoming a physical therapist. I always knew that I wanted to be around athletes and work with them, but I didn't really know what chiropractic was. I thought, chiropractic, like, what do they do? It headaches and neck pain. And that's the tip of the iceberg. We're good with pain, but a lot better with the functionality of the body and just making it work better. But I shadowed, several chiropractors close to my area, and, just fell in love with the philosophy, the power that made the body heals the body. And I was like, why doesn't everybody know this? And everybody that came into the offices, no matter what office I went to, they were happy. They were excited. They were filled with life. They were filled with health and not sick. And I worked at a hospital going through, undergrad. And I worked at as an exercise physiologist in a PT office. And although it was great and, they have their own space, right? It wasn't calling me. And once I found that, I was like, man, and same thing, you have to go to the Life University, you have to go to Life University down in Marietta, Georgia.
Yep.
And it just so happened that I never really left. I might be an hour north now, but never really left. And I want to continue to help other athletes and families. Our office is really very family oriented. See, Dr. Deb always says from womb to tomb.
Yep.
But yeah, athletes are really where what Dr. Dustin and I really love to work with. So that's what we're going to be talking today about. And before we get into how that works, I just wanted to ask Dustin and kind of have a dialogue as to really how chiropractic came to be in your life. Like initially, when was your first adjustment?
I think I was 33 or 34. And that was only after I had sustained a traumatic injury.
Okay.
That forced me to slow down. But in the hindsight, like it provided me the downtime to seek out more holistic care, because the military, especially the U.S. military, number one fighting force in the world, right?
Yeah. Yep.
But there's gaps still within the health field of that. And one thing they were really pushing was opioids and surgeries. And I'd never broken a bone. I'd never, outside of like twisting an ankle, never really sustained a major injury. And then when I got stabbed in the eye, it literally changed my perspective on the world.
More ways than one.
Yes. When they started introducing chiropractic back in 2016 on the West Coast, as far as in the military, I took full advantage of that through physical therapy, acupuncture, massage. But chiropractic was the one thing that got me back in the game. It was probably 4 weeks, 5 weeks worth of treatment. And I felt like I was ready to get right back into the teams. Yeah. And so that's what got me interested in chiropractic. Now, once I got out and I was receiving chiropractic through community care, like I mentioned earlier, the chiropractor that I was seeing, you could just see the love and the passion that was in it. It wasn't like going to a normal medical appointment where they just wanted to write your script and then get you out of the door. Like they wanted to know everything about you. And so they knew about me that I wanted to be of service to people. And I just couldn't figure out how. I applied for the fire department. I applied for the police department, but I didn't qualify because I only had vision in one eye. So I was like, there's still got to be a way. And so she asked me, if I ever considered being a chiropractor. And it never crossed my mind until then. And so I applied, to Life University. And I grew up in Kentucky, spent 9 years in California, and then moved to Georgia just because we wanted to be back in the Southeast. No idea that Life University was here. So it wasn't my plan. And when I stopped forcing my plan as far as wanting to be in the military more and more, chiropractic, opened my eyes, so to speak. And that's what led me here.
That's amazing, man. It's funny to see kind of how where you thought your direction of life would go, and then kind of how God just kind of redirects you in the position path that not just you need, but think about others need you too.
Absolutely.
And I could go down a whole route about that. You think about if you don't stay healthy for you, stay healthy for your loved ones, and there's this thing going around on Instagram and TikTok nowadays, but it's a good point. Like they ask, well, yeah, you say that you die for your kids, right? And a lot of times this is geared towards the men. But either way, male or female, like, oh, you would die for your kids, but would you eat healthy for them?
Yeah.
Would you go to sleep for them?
Would you get up down that cell phone for 30 minutes a day for them?
Yeah. And they've done some crazy studies on that too, like getting home and being on your phone and like thinking you're being present with the kids. Yeah. In reality, you're not. And how much, even my dogs, like you guys probably can't see them right now, but my dogs are laying right next to me, and being on the phone while you're with them, you think, oh, you're being present with your dogs, and you're not. And they can sense that. Yeah. So pretty crazy, man. But so let's jump into, I want to know, like, you've been an athlete all your life, and like you said, collegiate soccer, what is the difference now? And maybe there isn't, right? What's the difference then versus now as being an athlete with injuries, injury prevention? Has things changed for you the way that you prevent injuries, let's say?
Absolutely. I will celebrate my 39th birthday in September. And
happy birthday.
Yeah, thank you. When I was in my late teens, early 20s, I was invincible. Mm-hmm. I could twist an ankle, jump, right back into it. I could eat an entire container of Oreos and have no issues with it. But that's not the proper way of doing it. I was relying on my youth and natural athleticism at that time to allow me to do things. And I wasn't functioning fully, but not aware of that,
right? Because
I was so young. As I get older and I'm starting to focus more on the prehab and then the rehab portion, because going out and performing, that's the culminating event of all the work that you put in before and after.
Right.
And a lot of athletes don't realize that, especially if they're not professional athletes, because they're not being catered to. They have to take care of all this stuff on themselves. So
That's a good
getting the
point.
proper sleep, getting the stretching, eating the proper food. And then what I've noticed, especially, is when I started getting under chiropractic care and getting my neurology taken care of, everything was firing on all cylinders, and my recovery was faster. My performances were better. I again, being almost 40 years old, and I'm running times that less than 1% of the world
Right.
are running. And I don't just attribute that to, my good looks, although they are great. It takes that work before, and then more importantly, the work after to stay healthy, to stay in the game.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think actually maybe just kind of dive into it a little bit, kind of give it a snippet as to like chiropractic. So would you as an athlete and a practitioner of chiropractic care, you said before and after, right? I get this question a lot from my athletes and even my families, like, hey, if I'm going to get adjusted? And there's some philosophical differences with this too, but even from a physiological standpoint, a biomechanical standpoint, like when somebody comes in and asks you, hey, let's keep with athletes, right? So I have an athletic event, let's say a soccer game, should I get adjusted beforehand or should I get adjusted after?
It's a great question. You could think about, NASCAR or Indy. Do they do a tune-up or check over their vehicles before they take it on the track?
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. It should be the same thing with the human body. Do you put up a racehorse back in the stables without taking care of it to make sure that it's well in order? No, you got to make sure that you're looking after that athlete, even though it's a horse, afterwards as well, to ensure that it's going to perform as well as, if not better, that next time you take it out. So I absolutely agree that adjustment is essential, at least to get checked before your athletic event, and more importantly afterwards, because we put so much demand on our bodies, no matter what your sport is,
right?
That, when you're getting to the top of your game, whatever your game is, you're pushing your body to the limit. So it's good to make sure that, musculoskeletal, neurology wise, you're right where you need to be. So I think an adjustment, at least to be looked over before and after, is really important.
Yeah, no, and I would agree. To kind of piggyback on that, I used to adjust a lot of the athletes at Life University in the sports chiropractic field there. And, it was really cool. We had certain hours that we would go in and be there for the athletes. So they'd know, okay, yeah, we got chiropractic students that are here. And so we can get adjusted. But one team primarily, the basketball students, also the basketball players, we would be there for them before their games too. But I just always remember the rugby team. It wasn't mandatory to get adjusted, but it was highly recommended from their coach to get adjusted prior to the game. And I was in their locker room, and I had my table. I was in their locker room whenever they came in, and like as they came in from practicing and warming up at different things, they would get on. And these guys are huge, man. Their legs were bigger than my body, and I think no, there's no chance that I'd be able to adjust these guys. But they moved great, and guess what? Their coach understood the power of chiropractic care and making sure that they rehabbed and prehabbed and all that good stuff to get them moving to the best of their abilities for their event. And those guys were national champions for how many years in a row? Like 6 or something like that beat Penn State. And it wasn't even a game. It's attributed to how they take care of their body. And the thing that you said, I like, you're invincible back in the day, right? You could eat whatever you want. I did the same thing. In undergrad, I just wanted to get big. Yep. So I was eating, and I still looked like skinny, right? I looked healthy, and I was eating Burger King, McDonald's, Wendy's, and I had a fast metabolism. So I didn't really look like I was unhealthy. Granted, now looking back at it, I see some pictures and I still was unhealthy. It was like a secret unhealthy. And my body I was on 2 different medications by the age of 22. That's not normal. And that wasn't genetics. I played it up to genetics because both my parents had, not my parents, but my parents' side, each side had high blood pressure. So I was like, oh, it's just genetics. I'll just take this pill for the rest of my life. When in reality, I was solidifying my fate right there. I was living into it. But what you said was like, you ate all this stuff and you were invincible. But do you think that had any effect of even now, like some of the stuff that you did in the past? Obviously I know the answer, but like, what do you think about that? And what would you say to those same kids right now that are saying that they're invincible?
We do a great job as young athletes, again, early teens, young 20s, looking at these professional athletes that we want to emulate. Yeah, and all we're seeing is the performance on the court, on the field. We're not taking the time to look into what they're doing for their diet, what they're looking for their prehab and their rehab. You will see that, they're putting that high-end fuel in their bodies, not the low-end fuels like we talked about, which is actually stressing our bodies out and it's counterproductive. So I would say that, if you really want to perform, you need to look at the fine details of what they're doing, not what they're doing on the court. Because again, that's just a culminating event of all the work they've put in prior to. Again, they're looking into the nutrition, they're looking into their PTs, they're looking into the chiropractic, all that stuff that's helping get them to the top of their performance.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I would agree. So yeah, so some of those guys, their legs look like tree trunks, and we got them adjusted pre and post game. Majority of the time it was pre-game for them, because obviously the coach knew the benefits of that, and we'll go into some of those benefits. There's very well researched just about the brain waves, beta, theta, alpha, even delta now, like what that does with the chiropractic adjustment, the specific chiropractic adjustment, and then also like balance and agility. It's changing all those things just by increasing the curvature in your neck, which is amazing. But yeah, those guys got adjusted in 6 or 7 championships in a row, and it just goes to show you it matters. It matters how you treat your body, and it matters how you rehab and prehab, for that matter.
Absolutely.
So kind of tell me, like, what did being in shape mean to you in your 20s versus now? So really in your 20s, let's go from there.
So yeah, I mean, being in shape in my 20s, I was a collegiate athlete. So a lot of mine was performance based, but always more so like outwards appearance as well. So like I always considered myself like a running or walking business card, so to speak. I felt like if I looked a certain way, that meant I was going to perform a certain way, neglecting the more important part, which was taking in the right nutrition. And then more importantly, making sure that my nervous system was taken care of. I just didn't know about it. This was, back in the early 2000s. I just figured if I ran fast, if I, lifted heavy, that was going to take care of everything. So I wasn't focused on the nutrition like I should have been. Wasn't focused on the nervous system like I am now.
Yeah, no, and that's a good point. So in your 20s, it was really more so the external, right? Yep. Hey, let's look good. And if I look good, I must be, working well, not always necessarily feeling well, right? Even in my own experience, I was bloated. I didn't really think anything of that. I had headaches all the time. Like I'm telling you, like 4 or 5 times a week, wow. I had headaches. I don't even know if you know this, but yeah, I was on Singular they thought I had allergies. So I was on Singular. So that was actually 3 medications, Singular, Losartan, and then omeprazole for heartburn. But I had heartburn, right? And then I was having all these sensitivities. I started getting sensitive to shrimp. We used to eat Olive Garden all the time, and I would do that, the shrimp Alfredo or the seafood Alfredo. And then I started getting real bad heartburn from that. And my body was saying, help me. But since I looked good, I was like, I'm healthy, right? Yeah. This is just genetics. More and more research coming out. At first they thought 66% of genes you couldn't do anything about it. That was it. And then they came out and said, wait a second, it's only 33%. The rest is epigenetics. And we were like, wow, that's awesome. So he gives the people the power, right?
A chance,
right? No more excuses. And for those that don't like excuses, that was awesome. For those that maybe do, and I'm not downplaying any or shaming anybody, but we get in this cycle, and it's big thing. We get into this cycle where we just tell ourselves something. That's neuroplasticity. Yep. So neuroplasticity, meaning axons, the nerve literally will make other connections. And then we live into our reality, or we create our reality, really.
Yep.
But if we're constantly telling ourselves we can't do it, or it's just genetics, then we pretty much just live into that. But now they've come out and they said about 8% is really genes that you can't really turn off. That's true genetics rather than epigenetics, which is huge. 92% you can do something about, and it's really the things that you do on your day-to-day basis, which is big for our athletes.
Yeah, imagine if 92% of the population, or even a person, operated out of 92% of their actual capacity. If they just said yes to 92%, everybody would be their own athlete in their own right, versus just sitting and watching Netflix all day.
Yep. Well, imagine what our society would look like too.
Oh,
I mean, if you change yourself, right? And we talk a lot about this in our office, but like if you change yourself, then you change the people around you. You have a ripple effect. And I think it's BJ Palmer, but Dr. Deb loves it. Man, I'm going to butcher it.
You never know how far reaching what you say, do, or think, can reach other people.
Exactly. I was never called a wordsmith, but that's exactly what it is. And you live into that. One thing that I'll just get you a quick little tip right now, and for athletes and just other people alike, and like we talk about, it's, you're your own athlete, but positive affirmations in the morning.
Absolutely.
You change your brainwaves. So saying 3 or 4 things in the morning, saying a positive thing. Okay. We have, I think it's something like 60 or 70,000 thoughts a day.
Mm-hmm.
And how many of those are negative?
Most of them. Yeah.
Yeah, most of them. So, and again, they did studies on this. It's 80% are negative. It's crazy. So if we start off with a positive, how is that going to affect our day? And then our next day and the next day, it's just going to build upon itself. And that's the same thing with the chiropractic adjustment. If you're getting your nervous system checked, right, you're adjusting that atlas, which is top bone in your body. Everything runs through that. Do you think that you're going to have better gameplay? Do you think that you're going to be able to throw the ball better, have better agility?
Absolutely. Well, and then it gives your body the best chance to adapt, because of the innate intelligence. So whether you make the right
and what
choices,
is, real quick, what is innate intelligence there for the people at home?
So innate intelligence is your body's innate ability to heal itself from the inside out. Some people refer to it as homeostasis, but we like to refer to it in the philosophical aspect as innate intelligence. Your body's going to do what's best for itself. And like Dr. Brandon mentioned earlier, he was having heartburn, but instead of listening to his body saying, help me, he was going against that for years until he discovered chiropractic. And then through that, he was able to better take care of his body.
Yep, for sure. And one thing that we do in our office is functional nutrition as well. Yeah. So that goes hand in hand. We won't dive too deep into that, but Dr. Dustin mentioned it. The things that you eat plays a factor in how well you heal and how well an injury heals, how quickly you get back on the field. But not only that, I mean, pain too. Yeah. People think that the pain that they have, it doesn't have any correlation to the things that they're eating. What do you think about that?
Well, I laugh because I was one of those individuals that for the longest time that thought nutrition had nothing to do with the inflammation that I was having. Yeah. And you would think with being an endurance runner, that's the one thing I would be worried about would be inflammation. Yep. So once I started looking into that, because inflammation, that's essentially what causes the pain. Mm-hmm. Once I started getting on that anti-inflammatory diet and started focusing on foods that were anti-inflammatory, it was a game changer.
So, and kind of speak into that a little bit, game changer as in, obviously you noticed that a little bit later. How so? Was it like you said, was it in, your after the event or even during?
Yeah, during and after. It makes me smile when I'm out here doing these long runs and I'm in my happy place and I know that I've taken care of myself leading up to it, especially when I talk about like inflammation. Yeah. The more you can offset the pain, the more you're less likely to think about pain, right?
Right.
So when I'm out here doing it, I'm in the mile, 50, mile 80, and I'm not feeling the pain because the inflammation is significantly reduced leading up to that. Mm-hmm. My thresholds are increasing. And then afterwards, if I'm drinking, my protein shakes that have my, my blueberries or my other anti-inflammatories in it, I know my recovery is going to speed up significantly, right? Because I'm putting the right fuel that my body deserves. And needs afterwards.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't realize that. They're like, oh, well, I deserve to have this giant pizza, full of inflammatories. And, it's okay to have that from time to time. For sure. But if you want to perform at your top level and you want to stay there, you got to take care of your body from the inside out.
Yeah, no. And I was one of those people. I was just going to ask, like what's something that you did for recovery that for even an injury that maybe you wouldn't do now? And that would probably be me. Like even, those microtraumas in the gym, like that's not actually an injury, but you're trying to recover from the things that you did at the gym, right? And build muscle. Well, and there's different thoughts about this, but I was like, I just made it an excuse for me to have sticky buns. I would go get those like Little Debbie sticky buns and I'd have 3 or 4 of them and then be like, oh, I'm just trying to get high glycemic index, right? So that I can get the protein in. And there's some truth to that, right? There is for sure, but I don't need 4 of them. And
I always thought calories were calories.
Yeah, right.
So, and that couldn't be farther from the truth. My resting metabolic rate is like 3,500 calories. So I'm burning calories more than most people do when they go and work out. Yes. So I was like, I can go and eat this entire row of double stuffed Oreos. I can go and have this drink, this, that, and the other, because it's all calories. Mm-hmm. Not knowing that I was just slowing my body down and slowing the process of recovery down. I used to, after a long run, I'd take a shower, just hang out on the couch. I wouldn't stretch. I wouldn't eat the proper foods, and then wonder why I'm so stiff and just tired and lethargic the next day. And it all came down to I wasn't taking care of my body, both, physically, but also, nutritionally
Right.
afterwards as well. So when I started turning that and then also getting under chiropractic care, I'm telling you, I don't think I've hit my peak yet. I don't think I've hit my PRs. And, I've run thousands of miles, and people say, oh, well, your knees are going to pay for it. Your hips are going to pay for it, this, that, and the other. I'm running so fast without injury. And again, it's through nutrition and chiropractic care and then the prehab and rehab.
Yeah. So let's go through some of the benefits of getting adjusted and chiropractic care, because is it, you get this a lot too. Is it just for adults, right? And obviously we talked about young athletes, but how young, right? How young can somebody get adjusted?
Well, I mean, the baby in the womb is not getting adjusted per se, but the mom, it's important to get the mom under care as well. And then as soon as from the moment the baby's born, I know Dr. Shaley and Dr. Deb have adjusted people right there in the birthing centers.
Yep.
So, and I have 2 kids in my home. I have an 11-year-old son and a 9-year-old daughter, and I check them 2-3 times a week, not necessarily adjust them, but what they need. So to make sure that their neurology is set up for the best chance to go throughout the day.
Okay. And that's great. And I agree. And so you start them young, make sure that get them checked, get them checked. It doesn't necessarily mean that you go to a chiropractor and you get adjusted right off the bat. You want to make sure that it's what their nervous system needs.
Yep.
And a lot of times it is from compression, even from the birthing process itself, but that builds upon it, with athletes. And young athletes. So a lot of our young athletes now are anywhere from 10 to they're in their like 16, 17, 18 years of age now. And you have those guys that really want to go to the next level and girls that really want to go to the next level. And some can be, they're very mobile, right?
Yeah.
And I have some people coming in, they're like, oh man, it feels so good when I adjust my neck, right? And when I adjust my own neck. So, and just to give people tips here, why is that such a big deal? Like, why is that not what we recommend typically?
Well, one, you need to be specific, right? When you're just wrenching on your neck or wrenching on your arms or so on and so forth, you're creating more mobility that doesn't need to be there. And hypermobility is it's definitely not the way that you want to go, because there's a reason why the bones are around the neurology. It's to protect it. It's providing armament to protect that neurology, because without it, the muscles aren't going to work, the vessels aren't going to work, the organs aren't going to work. So cracking your own neck, although it may feel good and sound good and get views on TikTok and Instagram, it's not what you want to do. You want to come to somebody that is going to put that impulse into your body that's very specific and designed for that.
Exactly. And that's, even if you just by chance, by pure luck, are getting the right segment to move, right? That right joint that takes the pressure off the nerve. If you're doing that 4 or 5 times a day, that's like me coming to your house 4 or 5 times a day and adjusting you. There is such a thing. So there's too much of a good thing can be a bad thing, right? So I don't think I've ever went to somebody's house 5 times a day and adjusted them. Now, are there cases, again, in relationship to certain things that people need to be adjusted more than once a day? Yeah, that's typically acute things going on, and you have to make sure that you're doing your due diligence. But the most of the time, if you're doing that for a long period of time, it can become hypermobile. And that gas is it's always going to be relieving. The pop is always going to be relieving, because that's just what it is. It's gas. You don't need a chiropractor to get that. I'm sure you've probably done some stretching and you hear some popping and clicking. That's not a specific chiropractic adjustment. And again, if you're doing that constantly with really quick movements, you're going to become hypermobile and have more issues and maybe more injuries down the line.
Yep.
So that's one thing, right? One thing. Another thing, maybe diet wise, let's give them another tip. So let's do about 3 tips. That's one, just from a biomechanics standpoint and doing some self-adjusting at home. So do not. And then 2, something dietary, right? Daily. What's your daily supplement that you take?
So my daily supplement, so I'm big on making sure that my electrolyte balances are key.
Yeah, it's huge.
So because your muscles operate on certain vitamins and minerals. If you don't have that right balance, they're not going to fire right. So you're going to get cramps, you're going to get tightness. And so I make sure that, and it's taken years and I'm still balancing out right, because the demands could be different on a different day. So it's I wouldn't say it's an experiment, but I've got not every supplement is targeted just to me.
Right.
So if I know that I'm going to go out and I'm going to do a long run, leading up to that, I'm making sure that my hydration levels are optimal, that my electrolyte levels are optimal, that my protein intake is optimal.
Yep.
So that way that I'm giving myself the best opportunity to perform. So making sure that all my spark plugs, so to speak, are changed out and the right fuel is there.
Yeah, no, that's great. And the big ones that people talk about for electrolytes are, magnesium.
Yep.
And we could do a whole webinar on magnesium because there's 10 plus different magnesiums. Then you got obviously sodium, right? And good sodium. And then you got potassium as well. Those are the big ones that people think about. But then you also have, what's his name? Gary Brecka. He always talks about it too, but like the mineral salts, the sea salts, right? The Celtic sea salt. And I actually do use Baja Gold in the morning. I take a little pinch and I throw it back and I get some water and I down it and make sure that I get my water in there as well. You can't just take the salts, but that keeps you hydrated, and it keeps that balance of water as long as you're getting it in there, and the salts to keep you ready and keep your muscles going and everything else like that. And the cells, right? The polarity of the cells.
Yeah.
But there's other electrolytes in the Celtic sea salts, like boron and selenium and chromium and all the things that we don't necessarily think about that are major to our systems of our body.
Yep. And a good touch point there is like a lot of people think that, oh, I have to drink, half my body weight in ounces of water, right? Which is great and all. But if that's all you're drinking, but you're not putting those electrolytes and nutrients, it's just flushing it out. So you need to make sure that you're balancing it right with the right electrolytes and minerals, instead of just burning candles from burning the candle from both ends, essentially.
Right.
But now, now that I'm approaching 40 and I still feel like I haven't reached my peak, it's all about longevity. I like to push my body to the limit, but in order to do that, I have to come at it from a holistic approach. And that can't just be running a lot of miles, lifting a lot of weights. I have to do it from the inside out and focus on the nutrition, focus on the hydration, focus on the chiropractic adjustment. And, the stretching before and the after, because if I don't, my body's going to break down and I'm not going to be able to train like I want to, perform like I want to.
Yeah, no. And all great points. We went into this the other day, but we talked about, everybody's going to die. Right.
Yeah, it's true.
And we kind of all chuckled about that. That was the inspiration of the morning. Like, hey, we're all going to die. But the reason behind that is, we all have an expiration date. How do we want to live in this time? And how do we want to be remembered? Right. What are the valuable things that we want to help people with, or we want to live our life to the fullest? And because I asked several people this in the office, it was like, let's just say if you knew when you were going to pass, right, and go be with our Creator, let's say it was in a year or in 5 years, would you live your life a little bit differently? And everybody said yes. It was a resounding yes.
Yep.
And, I think of what I still want to accomplish and do in my lifetime. And, we think that we're always going to be here. So I'll just do it tomorrow, right? I'll just do it tomorrow. Well, in reality, you don't know. Tomorrow's never promised. So if you have some kind of intentionality behind your life, you live it a lot differently, really. And that's the same thing with athletics. So some of the things that I want to kind of go into, just give a couple tips. But before we do that, actually, I want to talk about injury and injury prevention, because we all had them. It's not if, it's when you get injured, especially being an athlete. What's one of the things that you used to do, or maybe just in a specific injury, to try to rehab it that was wrong in the past?
Growing up in the 90s and early 2000s, through athleticism, it was just gut it out, push through it. And that couldn't be the farthest from the truth. If you're in a game time situation, maybe. But if it's coming down to training, if it's coming down just to your weekend warrior stuff, there's absolutely no reason why you should be pushing through an injury, creating more insult to that injury. So that's one of those things that I wish I had realized early on, that I didn't have to do that. And now that I have children, now that I'm getting a little older, like I think about it, like how can I make this feeling, this euphoric feeling of being ambulatory and moving and enjoying the outdoors, how can I make that last? And that comes down to me taking care of myself the best I can, pushing it to limits, but focusing on that prehab and that rehab. Because if I don't, like you said, all it takes is, literally a blink of an eye, for something to happen, and then that's all over. And, yes, can you adapt and change your way of doing things? Yes. but why get to that point? Why stress your body to the point of complete destruction when you could have just prevented that by making some small changes? So that's probably my biggest thing is don't push through unnecessary injuries.
Right.
Get checked, do the right things before and after.
One of the things that, I think of is, and I was never a chiropractic kid, so just having that thought process now, like now it's just a way of life. Like, oh, you get injured, or oh, you're sick, you need to get adjusted. You feel healthy, you need to get adjusted, right? That's the preventative wellness aspect of chiropractic care, or at least you need to get checked to get adjusted.
Yep.
It was never like that. My mom was more conservative. She was in the medical field. She was a respiratory therapist. But she was always the one that pushed me, like, you don't have to go to the hospital, or you don't have to go to the doctor right now. Like, let's see how your body, does. And I was a big baby. I'm like, Mom, just take me to the hospital. I don't want to miss another day of school. Right. Then she would after a certain amount of time. And then I would get on antibiotics and go through that whole realm. But I think that really broke me down. But in an injury standpoint, you can't really ask what if. You try not to like live in this, like, well, what if? But, sometimes I do. I'm like, I wonder if, that fracture would have healed a little bit quicker if I would have been under chiropractic care, or eating healthier. Those two things go hand in hand. And I didn't eat the healthiest, growing up in an Italian family, like it's all carbs,
yep.
Which my wife would probably disagree with me, but I think my blood is, 50% carbohydrates. So maybe I need them, but, but there's that, right? But eating healthy and then also getting adjusted. I just wonder how maybe that would have changed my rehab and some of the things that I did in the past, got me on the field a little bit quicker.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that brings up a good point. So the people that I've seen, the athletes, the general population that I've seen under chiropractic care, they are usually less sick, healthier people, better performance, more awake. It's just all the things that people aspire to be and wish they could, that they're not going to get through, medicine, so to speak.
Yeah.
These are what is happening under people with chiropractic care. Like my kids are never sick.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that comes again through getting checked and getting adjusted, but also doing things naturally, versus forcing what we're being told is the right thing to do.
Right.
And then taking charge of our own health, which I think a lot of us don't do. We just kind of follow like sheep, of what we're being told to do, and then wondering why we're not performing like we're supposed to.
Yeah, no, you're right. And like, that's why we do these educational things. It's not to judge, it's to inform, and I think it's like, it's a big deal because you're always getting that one aspect of healthcare, right? And at the end of the day, a lot of times it's more sick care than anything. It just ends up being, you stay sick for a longer period of time. If you're on this medication, then what does that medication have to do? Well, that medication is for my other medication, right? And then we get on this whole realm of like, we have this big box by the time we're, 35, 40, 45, 50 of all these medications. And that's just not really, I don't think the way to live, it shouldn't be. Now, do we need medication for certain things? Yeah, maybe acute stuff, but that shouldn't be the first thing. That and surgery shouldn't necessarily be the first thing. Now, everybody's case is different, but the first thing that we go to, become healthy, right? Let our body do the work that it is meant to do. We have a pharmacy inside of us that most people don't think to utilize initially. And it's free, guys. It's free. So one thing that you said that I wanted to touch base on was, a more clear-headedness and focus and sickness, right? Like less sickness. C1, C2, which is the two top bones in your neck. They talk about this, and there's research out there, 4 to 6 weeks of chiropractic care with changing the brain waves. And one of the brain waves that they looked at was the delta waves. And they talked about brain fog and how it's associated with increased delta waves. And the chiropractic adjustment within 4 weeks showed that they diminished the delta waves. And so we hear this all the time. I mean, that in the office, but like, man, I just feel more clear-headed. I don't feel like I had or have as much brain fog. Why is that? Well, it's not a figment of your imagination. It's your brain literally changing.
Yep.
So that's another thing. And then they talk about the curvature. Here's more research for you, but the curve, they did a study on increasing the neck in your curve to a normal cervical spine. So if you lose the curve, which we're supposed to have a C-shaped curve in our neck, if you lose that and it starts going forward, it puts a lot of pressure and tension on the spinal cord and those muscles. And you actually see agility, balance, and then also power in the legs, they all decrease. They all decrease, and it's coming from the upper neck. It has nothing to do with your low or your lower extremity, but all to do from the nervous system, the signaling from your lower extremities via the nervous system in your neck. It's the coolest thing, and I'm constantly talking to my athletes, my young athletes, about that, because nobody wants to go home and do their dinner roll, right?
It's true, but I mean, if you put it in something that they can understand, it's like if the circuit breaker is blown in your house, the light switch isn't going to work, right? Because the cause is this: the circuit breaker is switched off. Now, once we get that back online, the rest of the lighting should work, unless there's something wrong with the wiring, throughout the house.
Right.
But it's the same thing. The brainstem is that circuit breaker of your house, and we are that electrician that goes in and makes sure that it's turned on like it's supposed to be.
Yeah, no, that's it. And that's really what the premise of chiropractic is. People think that we're pain doctors.
No.
We don't treat pain. We don't treat disease. We connect brain to body. That is the main thing. And I think people think it's almost too easy, right? And sometimes even saying it out loud, it's almost too easy. But it's the specificity of that adjustment, getting that bone, making sure that inflammation is decreased around the joint, making sure the joint is moving in an appropriate manner. And that's what it is, so that you have each segment moving in relationship to one another. And then also getting that segmental movement. What does that do to the regional movement, which is your neck and your mid back and your low back? It makes it move better too, right?
Absolutely.
The biomechanics. And then globally, that's going to make the extremities work. Your arms, your legs, your knees, your ankles, everything's going to work better. And I always talk about the static electricity. If you might be too young to remember this, but I'm sure you've seen a TV series or something that I've talked about this before, but those old TVs, you remember those with the antennas? So the antennas, they would go like this to make sure that you could actually see a clear visual on the TV. Mm-hmm. And if it wasn't, then you'd have a lot of static, right? And you couldn't see the picture. That's the brain whenever there's an injury and you don't change the dynamics of the neuromuscular junction, right? You don't change the dynamics of the nervous system, understanding where that joint is at. That's what the subluxation does. It's a dysfunction, right? From the nerve, disconnecting the brain to body.
Absolutely.
So how do we rehab that? We get it adjusted.
Yep.
You can adjust an ankle that has just been strained or sprained. Now, granted, sometimes there's some pain there, so you have to decrease the swelling. But a lot of times, in my experience, the swelling has gone down even better with an adjustment.
Yes.
Very cool stuff. A couple things we're going to leave you with, you guys here today. Just a few tips. So, one thing, let's talk about maybe a tip or trick that you know of that you do in your day to day for nutrition. What can these guys and gals do at home to help maintain and optimize their body?
Well, you got to know the basics of nutrition, and we can explain that to you in the office as well. But understanding what your body's demands needs, because everybody's different. You can't just grab a jar of I don't know, food off the counter and expect that to be your fuel, right? So knowing the basics, vitamins and minerals that your body needs and where you can get those naturally. Because if you can get those naturally, that's the best way to do it versus getting it, through a bottle. Now, supplementation is sometimes needed because it's not, provided all the time in our food. So understanding that, I think, is really important. And then when you're hydrating, making sure that you're getting those electrolyte balances correct.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. That's great. And then the second tip, let's talk about, I think a big one really is when we talk about the thoughts, traumas, and toxins, the stressors of life, which everybody has. It's not going away, but the mentality and the emotional aspect, especially with our athletes, like you get into these funks and you feel like you can't get out of them. They even talk about yips in baseball, and it's all the mentality of how you think about yourself. It's the negative, stuff that you're like, man, I'm never good enough. I'm an imposter, right? What's something that you know of, right? And you talk to your patients about what's something that they can do at home for that stress?
Well, one of the things that I do every morning is I go through a gratitude list, the small to large things, because we are all blessed in so many different ways, right? So that's a huge thing. And then I'm a big high fiver and a waver and saying hello. So anytime I see anybody, and call me old school for doing this, but I like to greet people. And I have found that majority of the time, people enjoy that. and they receive it well. And then even like signing, the credit card machine or my checks, instead of signing my signature, I'll put a smiley face. And some people they'll look at me like, I know this isn't your signature,
Right.
but I appreciate that.
Yep.
Because finding humor and happiness in life is what it's all about. So that you can make excuses, to be upset, on a daily basis, but why?
Right.
So I choose to live my life in a more happy state than trying to focus on what's wrong in life.
Yeah, it's just choosing.
Yeah.
Right. That's great. Okay. And one thing I would just add to that is, this is more of I would just say box breathing, right? Like someday if you get into that state of like, man, I'm not enough. And especially if you're alone, I love, surround yourself with people and just talk to people too. That up levels everybody's energy anyway. And we talked about neuroplasticity already with the gratitude. So that's great. I love that one. That's going to be the best bang for your buck. And then, your use of time, but the box breathing is something you can take a deep breath in. You breathe in for 4 seconds, you hold for 4 seconds, and then you breathe out for 4 seconds. And you do that, 3 to 4 times. And that's going to help increase the vagus, stimulation, which calms your system down, a parasympathetic response, which allows you to rest, and calm everything down. So that's huge.
Yeah,
right?
that made me think of something I also enjoy doing, although I'm not great at it, is singing and humming.
Yeah.
That stimulates the vagus nerve as well.
Yeah,
And,
no, that's great.
Making me feel good, even though it may make other people's ears hurt.
Yeah.
It makes me feel great.
Just doing the shower or something.
Yep.
Or get dogs, man. I mean, honestly, I love my dogs. That's the first thing that I do whenever I come home is I hug my dogs, man. And it just gives me this little endorphins, because that's all they're there for, is like to love you, and they can say, you see the happiness. And my one dog right now, I don't know if you hear the bells in the background. Yeah. She wants to go outside, and I just, every time I see him, just super, super happy.
Yep.
And you can see the smile on my face while I'm talking about him. But okay, so that's tip 3. And I think the biggest thing, and obviously we're chiropractors, so we're always going to talk about this. And I think it's a big missing piece of any puzzle, of any person's puzzle, is structurally, what can you do?
Well, get checked, even if you don't, and that's the thing that people don't realize. And you mentioned earlier, like we're not there to solve pain, right? Although we're good at it,
right?
Get checked before it becomes an issue. Come in and get checked. Not everyone needs to get adjusted right off the bat, but you have so many different joints in your body, and it can start from, a talus being out of line that can affect, everything up into your neck, and then vice versa. Getting checked, getting under care, chiropractic care is essential. When I started getting under care, it changed my both daily, duties, but also my athletic performance as well.
Right. No, and I'm the same way now. Although I wasn't a chiropractic kid, this is Lupo here, but although I wasn't a chiropractic kid, now I understand the benefit, and I recommend it to all of our patients, whether they're sick. Obviously we're talking about athletics here, so events coming up. Yep. I always recommend come in beforehand and get adjusted. Make sure everything's boosted. 30 minutes to an hour or after the adjustment, you are at a heightened state of stimulation. Yep. And they've also shown that like calf muscles, they did at EMG, and they were showing that the calf muscles, actually the power output was increased. So, I mean, it's pretty cool. And granted, I learned that one in school, but like just small things like that. And think about how much a calf plays a role, or your calves play a role in how you move and you're mobile on the field. Yep. So take those things into consideration. Get checked. If you're not close to the Atlanta area or Sugar Hill area, we have a bunch of different chiropractors all around the states. And I'm sure even Dr. Joe and Dr. Deb know people outside the states. So reach out to us. We'll get you somebody that take a look at your x-rays and get you the best care possible. Make sure that you're staying on the field and you're rehabbing and you're prehabbing to the best of your abilities. So appreciate you guys. Thank you for watching. And I'm sure we're going to be doing a lot more of this stuff in the future.
Sounds great.
Awesome.